Hello, and thank you for joining us on today's Ask Andrew show, Canada's first Facebook live streaming family law question and answer show. My name is Andrew Feldstein, and I'm the principal of the Greater Toronto Area family law firm, Feldstein Family Law Group, with offices in Markham, Vaughan, Oakville, and Mississauga. Both myself and the entire firm practice exclusively in the area of family law in the province of Ontario. Today, we're joined by special guest Katie Gosse. Welcome to the show, Katie. Okay. I want to,
Hi,
I,
Andrew.
uh,
Thanks for having me.
it's our pleasure to have you on the show today. I want to start off with a more general question, which is, can you explain to our viewers what types of abuse would be considered domestic violence or family violence, which is a new term in the Divorce Act?
Yeah, so there's different types of abuse that can be done in the context of an intimate partner relationship, or even if you're post that relationship, so you could be broken up, it can still be considered domestic violence. It can be physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, financial. Today, we're going to really kind of open up the conversation about like online abuse and cyber stalking and how technology has influenced that. So there's spiritual abuse, and all of these things can be considered under the umbrella term of domestic violence.
Okay. So when we talk about it, because we're talking a lot today about technology and abuse with technology, would you consider one partner having access to the other partner's passwords and electronic devices a form of domestic violence or control?
Well, this varies by context, right? Because the whole idea of domestic violence is that something is used to gain kind of power or control over the other person. So inherently having the other partner know your passwords or have access to your accounts isn't abuse. It's not just that clear cut. But it's the way how they use it. So if someone does have access to your phone or your passwords or your accounts, and they use it in a way to control, manipulate you, or just like make somehow like bring disadvantage to you, then that would be considered abuse. If you're not consenting to that person having your passwords, then that for sure is a red flag. That would be a concern for me.
So here's a typical example I see where people try to grab the other one's phone, and whether they have the password, whether they try to guess the password or use it after the other person just did, it usually deals with extramarital affairs. Somebody thinks their partner is cheating, and what's the best source of evidence is to see who they've been texting with, right? And you often see that as being somebody tries to get in to prove or disprove that the other partner's been cheating. Do you view that in the context of domestic violence, or is that again contextual in terms of, is this a long-standing history in a relationship where somebody's trying to control who and where the other partner goes, versus somebody, they're in a marriage, all of a sudden they get this bad feeling their spouse is cheating and they say, show me your phone.
Right. Yeah. So it's a really good question, a common experience. I think in to answer the first part, it's if you're worried about your partner cheating on you, or there's this suspicious behavior and the kind of like trying to get your phone and like always questioning you and trusting you, that's kind of more the red flag of like maybe there's a lack of trust in your relationship, and maybe you're suspicious of some other things that might be contributing to why you might think your partner's cheating on you. Whereas the other context, let's say there's it just kind of out of the blue and you're like, who are you texting? Like, why are you texting? You're smiling, and are you cheating on me? And that partner, you kind of have to gauge their response. How do they respond? Oh no, like this is my private, or are they willing to be like, oh, this is what I'm talking about? And you can't really force anyone to show you anything on their device, but you kind of have to gauge how they're responding to you, their willingness to talk about it. If you do think they're hiding something, you can share that. Listen, I'm nervous that you're talking to someone. Can we talk about this? Like, and then see how they respond to that. So you can use it potentially to open a dialogue as opposed to like pointing the finger, trying to get evidence that will, I think, in my professional opinion, that will increase your safety as well. If you just try to open up the dialogue as opposed to accusing the person, and then they get defensive and then they start retaliating back on you. Oh, you don't trust me. What's wrong with you? And they kind of gaslight you potentially.
The problem is when we get into discussions where spouses are accusing one another of cheating, usually they're both going to gaslight each other very quickly. That's my gut feeling. That's what I see from my experience. And I know clients often will come in, look, I got this screenshot. They have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Look, I got the proof. And I'm like, unless they're not around to parent the kid or they're spending ridiculous amounts of money, it doesn't really matter. But it does really matter to the party who's thinking of ending the marriage, because that's an important element in their decision-making process, is should they stay in the relationship or should they end it? And so that piece of technology is important. I know, as an example, years ago, I did an interview with Globe and Mail in their life section. And I said, a real easy tell of somebody cheating is when they're standing outside their house in the winter with the garage door open on their phone and they're not smoking a cigarette. Because who's talking on the phone when it's 10 degrees below zero outside, unless they don't want somebody inside hearing the call?
Absolutely. I think it's a pattern of behavior, right? You're looking for maybe consistent red flags, consistent evidence that something might be going awry in your relationship, and then hopefully wanting to bring that up with your partner in a way that feels safe.
Now, what are some ways in which technology has been used to further abuse?
There's so many ways. A whole new classification of abuse now is like cyber abuse. We can people can be tracked online. We've got GPS where people are knowing exactly where their partner is. If you leave your computer open with your emails open, somebody could quickly go in and just view all your conversations, like if they're living with you. But it doesn't even have to be someone in your home for this now. It can be someone across the world or your neighbor. They don't even have, they can access so much of your personal information now that's stored online or stored on online accounts. And they can use that against you to harass you, to bully you, to manipulate you, for some financial reward. We also have like the potential for videos that are used potentially in intimate situations between romantic partners that maybe are done without consent. They can be threatened to be posted online to like shame and disname the individual, and that can be used to control and coerce somebody even more. So it's definitely made the risk higher for victims of domestic violence, because the access to their information to be used against them is a lot more easy.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things you talked about there is videos, whether it's with their consent or not with their consent. There haven't been that many cases, but whenever you see a case where somebody has tried to leverage some intimate videos that were taken with their partner's consent, I think the courts have determined that the intent was not for that video to be distributed in the public domain, and have come down in a very harsh way against the person who does it. And I would say to anybody who's thinking of trying to post those kind of videos, they really need to think twice about it, because if you're in a situation where you're in a custody battle, how are you putting the best interest of the child first and foremost if you're putting the other parent's intimate pictures online for the children's friends to potentially see? And that's how I think a court would look at it. So not only may you lose financially and be ordered to pay damages arising from that wrongful behavior, but you may find it significantly impact your parenting schedule. And if the kids are old enough to really understand what's going on, or they eventually are when they see it, imagine the level of anger that the child feels to the other parent for posting inappropriate photos of mom or dad in a way that is going to embarrass them if their friends, God forbid, got to see that. So people really have to think about putting their anger behind them. But the other thing that I see are innocuous ways, because you also mentioned tracking on your phone. So I'm going to think of a really innocuous way. I have Find My iPhone. And my spouse has Find My iPhone. She could be sitting there with Find My iPhone open all the time to see, am I really at my office? Or if I turn off my location settings, am I really turning it off because maybe I don't like, I'll give an example right now that the government of Canada is tracking people's phones, even though they say it's not specific to people. But let's say I don't like that. So I keep my location settings off. Am I really keeping it off for that reason? Or am I keeping it off because I'm doing things I shouldn't be doing? You know, that's an innocuous way. There's cases where children are followed by the former parent where they're in the other spouse's care. And then a new one that came to my attention, I was talking to some people about smart homes that are built now and all the technology that goes into a smart home. So if you think about a smart home now, and I'm unloading a lot on you at once, so I'll give you some time to
We're
answer.
talking about Big Brother here, aren't you?
Well, it's not Big Brother. It's when you have a smart home, every time a door or window is open or closed, somebody gets an alert. Every time an alarm is set in a home, somebody gets an alert. So picture if you're the victim of violence and you're not working and you're in the home and your abusive spouse is at work and sees an alert. Oh, you opened the back door. Are you doing that to sneak someone in because I don't have a camera at the back, but I have a camera at the front? Or maybe they have cameras at both of them. Just think about.
Even their friend comes over in the middle of the day and there's a video shot of that friend. Why was that friend coming over this afternoon? You didn't tell me you were going to have anybody over. What were you guys talking about? Right? Like that it's just more bait, right? Unfortunately, it's torturous to the person who is, trying to control the other person, right? They're constantly tortured about what this other person is doing. And I'm not, I have some sympathy for them, but at the same time, what they're doing is wrong. And I think, in a relationship that's not characterized with abuse or there's respect and equality in it, having these types of home monitoring systems isn't really a problem, right? Okay, yeah, you left the house. So go leave the house, not a problem, right? Oh, I saw that the garage door was left open. Can you close it next time? And not where were you going? Why did you leave by the garage? Like not all that kind of intense questioning, controlling response.
But the scary thing I think is there for the victim of domestic violence is the leverage that the abuser can get with that kind of technology and saying, well, I'm just putting it in so that we're all going to be safe.
100%. 100%.
And I can't imagine what it must be like to be that victim who, in the past, they might have been able to sneak out during the day. Now, they're really stuck.
Terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. Yeah.
So I look at this technology on one hand and say, wow, it's amazing technology to make sure nobody broke into my house. It's great technology for that. But it's horrendous technology. And you might say, well, if you're a victim of domestic violence, don't agree to having this kind of smart technology in the home. And I say, good luck to that person who's suggesting it, because the victim can't say to the abuser, hey, I don't want you to be able to see when I open the door.
That's it, right? Well, all of these things can be used positively or negatively in a relationship, and even for a victim of domestic violence, right? The fact that we do have cell phones now and you can leave the house with a phone means that you can call 911 when you're standing on the sidewalk, right? Or you can call a trusted friend to come pick you up and help you get your kids out of the house. So all of these things can increase someone's safety, but like you're saying, Andrew, they can be used to actually bring in more control and increase the risk for a victim of domestic violence. And you hit it right on the nail. Telling your abuser, no, I don't want this, or no, let's not do that. You don't really get to have a say when there's an unequal power dynamic in your relationship. They do what they want, and they're doing it most likely to increase their control and power over the other partner.
Well, I think absolutely they're doing it for that reason. And that's why technology comes with some great advantages, but some great disadvantages. And then you have people in the home have their different devices in their homes. And are they recording at times? Do people say to record? Because you really have to watch what you say now, because you don't necessarily know what a recording may or may not capture. So the technology has a lot of pros and cons to it. And I'll give the flip side of it is, too, the person who uh, may not be abusing, but could be accused of abusing, could have it all turned around and flipped on them to say, well, you got that smart home technology because you want to control me. You put the not tracking, but you have Find My iPhone on the iPhones because you insisted on tracking me, because you don't necessarily even need to put a GPS on a car when you have Find My iPhone if the other person's location settings on, because you can just watch it moving along. It's really easy. So,
Yeah, and there's these other apps too that you don't like that a partner can download on someone's phone, and then it looks like a different app, but it's using for different purposes. And same for victims, right? You can go to websites that are geared towards helping the victims, and then you click this button and it looks like a shopping icon. The abuser doesn't know that you've now been visiting a website that's helping you increase your safety for, in your relationship. So it's like you're saying, it's double-sided here.
and that's what makes things challenging, because it's hard to know when you take a case in front of a judge. There are cases that are really easy. So when I have a case where someone has been writing horrific things in text messages to their spouse, that's easy, because when you see that long history, a judge is going to read it. That's evidence. That's hard, concrete evidence. And if someone is putting that in writing, one can only imagine what happens, what they say orally. It's probably far worse. I think that's the logic that a court's going to take. However, most cases aren't that easy. Most cases are the cases where it's full of gray, where somebody alleges abuse, somebody denies abuse. And when you're walking in front of a judge, there is no black and white evidence. And a judge is left to weigh, does the story make sense of what the alleged abuser is saying, or what the victim is saying? And how is that going to impact parenting? And it's really hard. I mean, just as a simple example, we said before we went on the air, if my spouse knows my password to my phone, they can go on my phone, send me a text saying, you are driving me crazy, I'm going to kill you, hit send, then perhaps delete it. I'm going to look at the phone and just wonder, why is my spouse no longer in my past text messages? The guy must have done something stupid with my phone. And then I'm going to go to court and see that I sent this text message, and I'm going to deny that I never sent it. So there's all of these problems that you're going to have, that technology has some reliability, but not complete. Because if there's that one-off text, you may say, that wasn't me, she took it. I have a case where there's an odd hour, an email was sent from the wife's account to the husband for forwarding something from a past lawyer. And my client says, I never did it. He had access to my email. He sent it.
Right. Yeah. It's tough, right? Because showing a pattern of behavior, I think is the most important thing. When I used to work with child protection services, and I worked in the family violence unit, and often we'd respond to, if police showed up and it was a one-off incident, we interview the family, the children, we make sure everyone's safe. Everyone's saying, yeah, this is the first time it's happened. There are first times, right? It's not like it's always been there, or you're starting to realize it. But then that first time, if it keeps repeating and it keeps happening and it keeps getting more intense and the threats are more frequent and you're finding yourself more scared, this is when, probably from your perspective, Andrew, you would want to start collecting more evidence. And yeah, so it's that pattern of behavior that is important when establishing that kind of dynamic in a relationship.
Absolutely, but a lot of people are scared to gather that evidence.
Fair.
I'm sure if my spouse has access to my phone and I take a photo of my bruising the day after my injury, am I going to be smart enough to text it to my friend, delete the text, delete the photo, and delete it from my deleted items? Because that's what people really have to do if they're scared they're going to be watching. So they have to
Well,
be
and
really
so
smart
many
about
of,
it.
yeah. so many victims are so isolated. They're not even telling their friends and family that the abuse is happening. So much of the psychological abuse that they experience is that this is your fault. You made me mad. I didn't want to do this. If you had just listened to me, you wouldn't have got hurt. And this kind of psychological manipulation and gaslighting, as we said earlier, can make a victim feel less likely to reach out. So if they did get hurt, they take the picture, they do manage to think, okay, like this is evidence. Have they even told anyone? Right? So then what, your mother or your best friend randomly gets a screenshot of a bruise or something, and then they start flipping out, and so it's quite, dynamic what we're talking about here.
And, that leads to my next question, which is, COVID's made the world predominantly virtual. I'm really hopeful that it won't always be this way and we'll be back to normal soon. But how does that impact an individual's safety in their own home? Because we're talking about isolation. How does that happen? How does that impact it?
One of the main tactics of an abuser is to isolate the victim. So they slowly, it's not usually quite abrupt. Slowly, you just stop hanging out with your friends as much. You don't go out socially, or they start to frame people in your life as untrustworthy or against us, and they don't, and then slowly the victim finds that their social network, their social circle is quite small. With COVID making everything virtual, now you don't even go to the grocery store, or you get everything delivered. What's the chances now of you running into a close friend or someone that you could trust at the grocery store, where you could talk and say, oh, like, how are you doing? They say, you don't look so well. What's going on? Like, oh, and then, oh, I've gotten this fight. And then that kind of community connection is such a safety factor for women. Someone says, oh, that's not right. They go, what? It's not right? Like, he shouldn't be doing that? I didn't know that. And then that starts to give them a different perspective of what they're experiencing. And so that's a huge risk factor for the going all virtual. And then also we have, if everything is happening virtual on Zoom and video chats, et cetera, where's the privacy? Someone could be sitting outside your door listening to your whole conversation. So if you're calling a friend, or you're on a Zoom chat and the conversation naturally goes towards your relationship, and you want to share something that's been, upsetting you, or you've some abusive experience, and you're scared of that, of your partner, potentially overhearing it, what are you going to do? You're most likely not going to say anything. Or then you say, oh, I'll text you later or something. But then they're outside listening, and then they say, what were you guys talking about? What are you going to text her about later? And then it just keeps silencing the victim. It just keeps making their world smaller and smaller, and less likely to reach out and speak out. And that's when it gets really scary for the victim, and they're usually most at risk for the abuse that they're suffering.
Well, I always think pre-COVID, one of the hallmarks would be when someone wanted to move somewhere remote and it didn't make sense for their family life to be living remotely. And I mean, they have a larger lot that's just a ridiculous size so that there's no neighbors around, because that's part of isolation. So now we take the COVID Zoom world and we add it to people who've had a desire to move out of urban to more rural areas because it sounds nice, more land, more outdoors. But if you're a victim of domestic violence, now you've done Zoom, where at least maybe you're taking the garbage out or you're walking the dog, you may have bumped into a neighbor. Now that's not even going to exist because you're not going to see anybody from your property. So I see a lot of negatives, and I see you nodding. So it suggests to me you're probably in agreement with my theory that COVID has brought a lot of problems for domestic violence. And I think it's probably added a lot of stress to a lot of marriages because people are cooped up inside and they're not living their normal life.
Absolutely. I am agreeing with you, Andrew. It's very unfortunate that the way that the response to COVID and how it's really isolated all of us, right? How that would even bring more risk to someone in a violent situation with their partner.
And I think it may have turned some people who would have historically not been violent to being violent. Was their
Yeah, I
ability or
agree.
income being
The increase,
jeopardized.
yeah, the increase in people's substance use over COVID, the decline in people's mental health, they're not feeling maybe as capable or, stable to control their temper or, just walk out of the house and go to your families for the night, right? Whereas when we were in extreme bubbles, you weren't allowed to even go see another family member. You weren't allowed to go out. And so this isolation, right, is just such a huge factor that we have to consider.
I know for me, I went to my first social functions last night and it felt so awkward for the first time in 2 years. I actually put on a suit other than the blazer for Zoom. So it's a very strange thing for people now, the concept of getting back out there again. But this isolation, I can only imagine how horrific it's been for many people. Um, can you speak to whether you believe there's a link between technology facilitated abuse and other forms of domestic abuse?
I think we kind of touched on it a bit earlier, right? Like, so in the case of sexual abuse, if someone's forcing you to do things that you're not comfortable with or that you're not consenting with, right? And you still have to engage it because of the abuse, that can be recorded now, right? This is something that it's recorded and it's going to be used against them. Or people are saying like, oh, I'm going to take screenshots of these text messages, right? So then that just increases the conflict, right? When you're increasing the conflict, then there's more chance of hostility and potential violence in those situations because it's just so hostile. So I think in every situation, whether it's financial or sexual or religious or emotional, the use of technology can be used often, I think, as a threat. Like most often, like, well, I've got it here now. I'm going to do this. People are going to see this. They're going to know this about you. And then again, it works just to really withdraw and silence the victim and bring control over them.
Okay. And what advice would you give to one of your clients if they approached you and suspected they may be abused by their partner through the use of technology?
Yeah. So in social work, one of the first things that we do is we create a safety plan. A safety plan is essentially kind of like, what are you going to do if the situation escalates and you need to get out safely? So this is often in the case of physical abuse. But first off and foremost, I would say you need to tell someone in your circle, like that you trust that this is going on. Because I'm a counselor, I meet with them for an hour, maybe a week, or I'm kind of a very one-off support for them. They need that informal support of their family because who are they going to call in the middle of the night when the partner's drunk and threatening to throw the bottle at them? They're not going to call me. They're going to want to be able to call a trusted friend. They're going to need to know where they can go. And so there's very practical things like that so that we would create a safety plan. So just packing up a small to-go bag that might have some basic hygiene, some of your clothes, and then this is a tough part, keeping it in a secret place. I don't know if you have a personal car, putting it in your trunk or hiding it behind a bin in a garage or something, just a quick place that you can grab all your important information like ID, some cash, some hygiene, keys, these types of things that you could quickly grab on the way out to go get safe. But for other forms of abuse, emotional, psychological, it's not always needing to flee for your physical safety. And so I would recommend once it's maybe kind of de-escalated that you start to enact that plan when the conflict isn't heightened. And one thing I would also advise that my client is that usually the risk to the individual is higher at the point of separation when the partner is fearing that they're losing that other person. Their tactics will often go a little bit higher, a bit more extreme. It's scary, but it's to be expected. And so it's normal. And so if that's happening, even more reason to reach out to those formal and informal supports to help you stay safe before it even escalates more.
Well, you gave us a wealth of information with that answer. The other thing I'd want to say to people is remember location settings. If you're going to be running and hiding, Don't have your location settings on for your former spouse to know exactly where you are with Find My iPhone or the Android equivalent. I only say iPhone because that's the one I know. Katie, the show went by really fast, so thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you, and I really do appreciate you sharing your experience and expertise with us. The next Ask Andrew show is March 22nd at 12 noon Eastern Time. If you have any requests or ideas for future shows, please email us at info@feldsteinfamilylaw.com, and thank you for watching.